Beyond the ongoing US-Israeli genocide in Gaza, this year has seen Israel conduct hundreds of attacks on Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and most recently on the 13th of June, Iran. The Western media has claimed it as a 12-day war in which Iran has downplayed the devastation, but the same can be said about the reporting on Iran's defensive strikes on Israel. Can you give us your assessment of the reality of the situation and where everything stands now?
Yes, absolutely. Just on the first part of your question, the reality has again proved exactly what you've mentioned, that the Israeli occupation entity transgresses on all. It can only, in actual fact, survive if the surrounding region is weak. That is why it was so successful in its establishment in 1948 in the first place. And you've also brought the example of Syria. Since December, it's been under Giuliani and the HTS, formally designated as a terrorist group. This was an entity that was celebrated by Netanyahu, and they are very welcoming. So the HTS lot and Giuliani in power is very welcoming of normalizing relations with the Israeli occupation entity. But despite this, despite current Syria not showing any hostility towards Israel, we see that the occupation entity, Israel, did not hesitate to hit all of the Syrian government's military infrastructure and to occupy up to 3 times the landmass of Gaza in Syria. So that's in terms of Syria. That is not in bad terms with the Israeli occupation entity as it currently stands. And you mentioned Lebanon. As we currently see, there has been over 3,000 attacks since the declared ceasefire on the 27th of November, despite the Islamic resistance of Lebanon practicing restraint until this very moment. That is a part of its strategy of recuperating and building itself after the blows in September last year. But also, the Lebanese front doesn't want to tip the internal balance that is hostile because you have a very pro Western government in power. And the resistance of Lebanon, quite frankly, is not the government. So that's how it's different to, for example, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we know in Lebanon, it was the government that signed the ceasefire with the Israeli occupation entity. So the resistance really right now today in Lebanon is vindicating its position if it were to respond to any Israeli transgressions in the future. And we also have, the West Bank. The strategy today is shredding every last bit of Oslo. The occupation entity wants complete control over the West Bank, despite the PA, the Palestinian Authority in control, that really does its dirty bidding. And if we look at Gaza, we've seen over 600 days, nearly almost 2 years now, of everyday large massacres. Some reports were mentioning that even the Israeli planes ordered by Trump to fly back from Iran, the ammunition that it was carrying were all dropped in Gaza. This is the level of the killing machine that is crushing human life indiscriminately there, like it drinks water. And now, if we just quickly move on to Iran, it's a country that did not on any front prove that it went against the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, in producing enriched uranium for military use or for the production of nuclear weapons. That was never proven. We know the fatwa of Ayatollah Sayyid Khamenei, the supreme leader, in prohibiting its production. We know Iran in 2015 was the signatory of the JCPOA. That Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was something that Trump tore in 2018. So that was the negotiations to curb the enrichment to about 3.9%. And recently, Trump claimed that the goal was to halt all uranium enrichment in Iran for civilian purposes, that would be used for civilian purposes. And this is something that flagrantly goes against international law. But not only this, we know that without Trump's greenlighting, the aggression on Iran by the Israeli occupation entity would not have happened. So ultimately, the goal was to destabilize Iran in hopes of achieving regime change. And that would have been done through the assassination of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. This was ultimately what Israel had hoped for. And we saw a similar method that was employed on the 13th of June on the aggression in Iran, as was employed in Lebanon in September when the Israeli occupation entity went in. So that is ultimately killing the frontline commanders in hopes of disrupting the command and control. And we saw that the Iranian response to the occupation entity's initial aggression, I would argue it was not in proportion to the fear and the magnitude of aggression. It was less than that aggression that Israel and America used, but it was still very lethal. So in terms of where we are now, when Trump says we destroyed and we crushed and we ended the nuclear project, because he said that a lot, and he's used these kind of victory-laden terms, you know that there is a kind of message behind that. That is one that contradicts reality and carries a taste of defeat. Today, Trump doesn't want to hear anything about the Iranian nuclear files anymore because Iran has proven its military might on the ground. And on the other hand, we have Iran declaring that its nuclear facilities were significantly damaged. This is something its Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had mentioned. And that, in my opinion, also carries a kind of contradictory message when Iran says that, or it over exaggerates in a way the damage. That is a kind of victory in the sense that now you cannot stop us moving forward. We have the pretext to do what suits our own interests, which includes completely withdrawing the IAEA intervention into the Islamic Republic. So America's statements today is reflecting a kind of incapacity. We're seeing a recurring failure from America's side, where major goals are set, but they're not being achieved. We saw this in Yemen. Trump declared he would unleash hell, was the words that he used, to end the Yemeni challenge in the Red Sea. But after 7 weeks, we saw Trump actually going out and saying that we're declaring victory against the Yemenis without achieving any of the American goals. So after experiencing and discovering the true power balance on the ground with Iran, a new equation has now kind of been established, and the threshold and the momentum required to start any new war in the future has now risen, perhaps to a level where, nuclear weapons would only be used in the most extreme madness of war under absolute desperation, because conventional weapons against the Islamic Republic of Iran won't work. So this new ceiling presents the West with immense challenges. Either it has to acknowledge the new power balance on the ground, which has now been tested in a way that it never has been before, because if we remember, this is the first time in 40 years that Iran is at war. The last time was during the Iran-Iraq war from 1980 to 1988. So either that's the option, acknowledge the power balance, or America can continue this hostile approach against the Islamic Republic, which has also been proven to be a failure, because after 45 years of sanctions that have backfired and produced this kind of resilience and strength, despite the whole comprehensive embargo, we've seen that the sanctions have failed. And so what's left is recognition and letting go of the Western arrogance and superiority. So now that the regional balance of power has shifted against the Israeli occupation entity that's proven that it cannot defend and save itself against the Iranian hypersonic missiles and doesn't have enough anti-craft missiles and interceptors to help it in this regards. And after its failure to achieve the quote-unquote new Middle East project, that is establishing full domination and monopolization over decisions in the region of West Asia, so that all of its people and all the rulers would become absolute tools and servants to the Israeli policy under Western patronage, we've seen that fail. So yes, to give a balanced assessment, parts of the resistance axis have been weakened. We've seen the threats reach the heart of Iran, which Israel would have never dreamed of. And yes, the resistance axis previously had theoretical excess power, but all of that hadn't been tested up until this point. We've had nearly 2 years of the fiercest confrontations, and after the US and the Israeli occupation entity threw absolutely every single shred of what they have, they threw in all their weight militarily, destructively, and we know that it has 40 years of accumulated intelligence effort, and let's be real, it reigns supreme when it comes to intelligence. That should be enough to overthrow any fragile system. But given the huge disparity in that military strength and the weaponry between the American-Israeli side and the resistance axis, things stand very clear after the test. So I would categorize it as a very foolish, record-breaking period of warfare from the Western side. The Axis appears weaker in its image, but it's proved to be much more stable in terms of its real actual power, which had never been tested before, but now has been.